right, hi guys, how are you? I'm glad you guys could all be here tonight. We're gonna just dive right in with our meal prep, but if you guys have questions, let me know. I have everybody muted, so if you need to ask a question, the unmute should be at the bottom right side of your screen. Bottom left side of your screen. So first things first, make sure you mark all of your freezer packages, whatever you're going to be using. I'm using freezer bags. So you want to mark each one with the name of the recipe and then with the date so that you know exactly when you made it. And if you're going to leave anything out, you might want to make a note of that as well. So we're going to be making our Thai chicken, our Greek pork chops, and then we're going to be doing Cajun shrimp and sausage, Jamaican beef stew, and then a French chicken. All right, so we are going to be starting with our Thai chicken. As we are prepping these meals, if you have questions, like I said, feel free to ask. If you feel that you're falling really far behind and you have questions or concerns, or I'm just moving too fast, just let me know, and I'll slow things down a little bit. I do tend to prep pretty quickly. And if you get ahead of me, then by all means, power through. Don't worry about slowing down to stay back with what I'm doing. So we're going to start with our Thai chicken. We're going to grab our 2 chicken breasts. I use 2 separate cutting boards when I'm cutting meat. I have one for the meat, one for the veggies, and 2 separate knives, just so you don't get nasty stuff mixed up in between recipes. So go ahead and get your chicken. All right, so we're going to be doing 2 pounds. So I'm just going to grab 2 of these out of here, and that'll be roughly 2 pounds. All right, so the easiest way to dice chicken is to slice through the chicken breast right down the center. And then we're going to slice it this way and then slice it that way. These can be as big or as small as you want them to be. Think, Asian food that you would eat with chopsticks, bite-sized pieces, nothing too big, nothing too small, kind of, that nice center or midline, I guess I should say, for the sizes. All right. And I forgot to do this first. Should have done this first. You want to open your bag and fold down the edges. And I've got chicken all over this hand, so I'm just going to wash my hands first and try again. Because we want to be able to put the chicken directly into the bag. We don't use any bowls or anything else to mix. We just put everything right into the bag, because then it saves big time on cleanup later. So fold your bag open the way I just did, the way I should have done in the beginning. And then as you slice your chicken, you're just going to drop it right into the bag there. All right. So I've got some of my chicken sliced here. I'm just going to continue slicing it into smaller chunks. And then just toss them right in. Like I said, if you come up with a question, just unmute, because I won't be able to hear you otherwise. And if you type in a question, I won't see it until after we finish. So I highly recommend, if you have a question, that you just unmute yourself and ask it. If you are watching the recorded version of this and you think of a question, then feel free to email me or Facebook or text or whatever method you prefer for communication. And I will get back to you as quickly as I can with the answers to those questions. So this Thai chicken, it has some unusual ingredients. Not many people cook regularly with fish sauce or put almond butter in their chicken. But even though the ingredients are a little funky, don't leave them out. They are incredible. The flavor combination is just mind-blowing. This is really good over regular rice. If you are grain-free, over cauliflower rice. You know, you can serve it with, you know, just a side salad and eat the chicken by itself. It's kind of up to you. You can also serve it with, if you go to the store and get one of those bags of frozen Asian mixed vegetables, works out really well with that. You can serve it over top of those. You know, and it just lends a nice flavor to the vegetables with the sauce from the chicken. All right, so be careful as you are slicing and dicing. Go slow. Go at the pace that is safest for you while you're doing this. And if you are watching the recording, you can always pause it, you know, catch up and then restart it so that you don't get too far behind. All right, almost done with our chicken. And then after we finish this, we're going to wash up and then move on to our bell pepper next. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to drop this right into the bag. Oops, it's trying to get away from me. All right, I am going to rinse this real quick and wash my hands and then move on to a bell pepper. All right, and this meal prep program is also a great way to introduce your preteens and teens to cooking if they don't already help in the kitchen. Just put them to work chopping. It's a great way to get them familiar with how all this works. So, all right, we're gonna go on to our bell pepper next. And we're just gonna slice this, nothing fancy with it. So when you slice it in half, have a spot where you can throw the scraps because you're gonna obviously wanna pull the seeds out of the center. And every time you see me reaching over here, I have a small compost bucket. It's a tabletop compost bucket. And then we dump it in our main compost pile down at the end of our yard by the garden. All right, so you're just gonna cut it into slices. Cut both halves, because we will be including the entire thing. And then I usually cut the slices just in half to kind of go with the bite-sized theme here for our chicken. And then once we finish the bell pepper, we're moving on to our onion. So I actually threw my onions in the freezer so that I don't cry quite as much while I'm cutting them. I usually put them in the freezer about half an hour to 45 minutes before we start. And then the fumes just don't make you cry as hard. Sometimes if the center doesn't get a chance to chill, then it, you know, I'll still end up a mess while I'm cutting, but usually I can get them in the freezer early enough that it's not too much of an issue. So you're gonna cut the ends off of your onion, and then just make sure you take any peel off that needs to come off. And then we're just gonna do a quick slice. We're not gonna do anything fancy. So maybe 1/4 of an inch slice. Watch your fingers, be very cautious. There we go. And those are gonna go right in with our chicken and peppers. All right, and then we are going to move on to our liquids. We're going to start with a 1/2 cup of coconut milk. So I've got my 1/2 cup measure here. And normally I shake up my can and throw it in a jar, but I didn't have a chance to do that today. So we're going to go 1/2 cup of coconut milk and just dump that right in with our peppers and onions and chicken. And then we're going to go with a 1/4 cup of coconut aminos. So if you've never cooked with coconut aminos, these are basically a substitute for soy sauce. And the reason you would want to substitute is a lot of people actually have sensitivities to legumes. So peas, beans, soy, things like that. And so this gives you the same flavor without any of the digestive issues that could come from the soy. Some people also avoid soy because of the estrogen issues and all that kind of stuff, which it can, but it's a little bit more complicated. So, okay, so we're going to go to our fish sauce now. And again, this is a funky ingredient. If you're not used to it, just don't breathe in too much when you're opening the jar, because it does have a very strong smell, but the flavor that it adds to the food itself is absolutely amazing. Oh, mine does not want to open. I think I just messed up the opening. There we go. All right, so 1 tablespoon. And you're just going to dump that right in with all the rest of your ingredients. And then we're going to go with a half a teaspoon of cumin. So half a tablespoon of cumin. So a half a tablespoon is 1.5 teaspoons. And so I got my teaspoon measure here, and I'm probably going to have to grab another jar of cumin. So there's my half. And then I'm going to open a new one. I knew I was going to be low on this. This jar low. Doesn't want to open for me. Oh, there we go. All right, so then we're going to go 1.5 teaspoons, which is half a tablespoon of cumin. And then we're going to go 3 cloves of minced garlic. So grab your garlic. Oops, knocked over the old cumin. We're going to pop off 3 cloves here. So we got 1, I think that's 3. There we go. All right, easiest way to peel your garlic is to lay it on its side and just pop it real quick with your knife. And then the peel just slides right off. Oh, I ended up with 4 cloves. One of them's a little small and I didn't see it in there. But that's all right. I love the taste of garlic, so I'm okay with that. All right, so you can mince this with a knife or you can use a garlic press. I prefer to use a garlic press. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and like I said, I'm adding a 4th one, but the recipe only calls for 3. So we have 3 cloves of garlic, and then we're gonna add half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes. Where are my red pepper flakes? There we go. Thought I had everything out, apparently not. All right, so half teaspoon of red pepper flakes. So this dish will be a little bit spicier because of these. So if you prefer to leave them out, you can. And then we're gonna go with 2/3 cup of almond butter. There's my almond butter right here, front and center. So you're definitely gonna wanna use a spoon or a butter knife to help you measure this out. Otherwise it gets very messy. And I just buy my almond butter at usually Aldi or Trader Joe's. This one is from Trader Joe's today. Just give it a little bit of a stir because it's all the goop is on top. There we go. All right, so we're gonna go 2/3 of a cup. So I've got a 1/3 measure here, and I'm just gonna add that right in there. So we got 1/3, scrape it right into the bag. And then the other one. There we go, 2/3. All right, and then we're gonna do the juice of 2 limes. So you can just slice your limes and squeeze them. I do use a citrus juicer when I do this. We got 1 and 2. So either way, you want to start by halving the lime and then squeezing it directly into the bag or with a juicer. It's up to you. Now it does say arrowroot starch at as the very last ingredient. We are not going to add that now. That you want to add after you cook it. While the juice is still hot, you've moved the chicken out of either the slow cooker or the pan, whichever you're cooking it in. You want to just mix 2 tablespoons of arrowroot starch with about 2 tablespoons of water, and then you're going to mix that into the liquid left in your pan or your crock pot and let it thicken up a little bit. Arrowroot works the same way as cornstarch, so if you prefer, you can use cornstarch, but corn is obviously a grain, so we're avoiding that in a lot of these recipes. So it's up to you if you want to use it. It is the more common ingredient. I buy arrowroot starch. I think I bought it at a health food store here in town in the baking aisle, and it's the Bob Red Mill brand. So I'll pull that out and show you guys just so you can see it in a second. All right, so we got our lime juice. Toss it in with the chicken. All right, so now we are going to seal our bag, but with some air in it. You want to leave some air in it and give it a good shake. There we go. And then you press the air out of the bag. All right. And then you just want to freeze it. You know how I usually freeze mine flat on a pan in my that I keep in the freezer all the time for these kinds of things. And then once they're frozen, I move them out to my chest freezer. So I'm going to pop this in the freezer, and then we're going to move on to our Greek pork chops next. And here's the arrowroot starch, just so you guys can see what I meant by that. So the texture is very similar to, it's the Bob's Red Mill brand, you can see. The texture is very similar to cornstarch, both in the powder form and once you mix it in. So. All right, Greek pork chops. Go ahead and grab your next freezer bag or whatever container you choose to use. And we're gonna start with 2 teaspoons of olive oil going into our bag. Rinse a couple things here. All right, so I got my olive oil. Had to restock on a lot of stuff today, so a lot of this isn't open. All right, going right into the bag, 1 and 2. All right, and then we are going to add 4 teaspoons of lemon juice, which is 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon if you want to do a quicker way to measure it. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got my tablespoon measure in hand, so I'm going to do 1 tablespoon, which is 3 teaspoons, and then 1 teaspoon for the 4th teaspoon. All right, and then we are going to add 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Butchered that one. So we grab our tablespoon measure again. And toss that in. And then we are going to add 2 teaspoons of oregano. So I've got my jar of oregano and a 1 teaspoon measure. I'm dropping them in. We got 1 and 2. And then we're going to add a teaspoon each of salt and pepper. So I have a jar of kosher salt here that I use. You can use sea salt. You can use whatever you prefer. The black pepper, use as much or as little as you want. I'm going to add a teaspoon, but if you prefer a little less spicy, you can add less. If you like it more spicy, you can add more. It's up to you. All right, and then we are going to add 1 teaspoon each of onion powder and garlic powder. This is a really quick recipe, in case you can't tell. So there's our onion powder, and then a teaspoon of garlic powder. All right, and then the last thing is just a little squirt of mustard. I'm just going to use a Dijon because that's what I have over here. So calls for a teaspoon. 1 little quick squirt should be plenty. All right, so then we are going to just kind of massage the bottom of the bag a little bit to get all the spices mixed in with the oil and the lemon juice. Very quick recipe. And then we're gonna drop our pork chops in there and we're done. That's all there is to it. Pork chops. So these ones, you can grill these or you can put them in the slow cooker or the oven. It's up to you. We will probably end up grilling them. It's quick, it's simple. The char gives it, you know, an extra flavor. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and you can use 4 to 6. I just bought a pack of 4 pork chops for this one. We probably, my kids don't eat a whole lot, so this will be more than enough for one meal and probably leftovers for lunch the next day for us. All right, so give it a good shake. Make sure that marinade gets all over your pork chops. There we go. And then press the air out, pop it in the freezer, and recipe number 2 is done. All right, so we are done our first 2 recipes in 21 minutes. So we are on a roll here. Moving on now to our Cajun shrimp. Now with our shrimp recipe, we are not gonna actually be adding the shrimp to the bag. You're gonna keep your shrimp stored separately. Because if you know, shrimp cooks very, very quickly. So you don't wanna be cooking, you know, all the veggies that are in this. Your shrimp will end up, you know, tougher than leather. It'll be disgusting. So store the shrimp separately, and then we'll add it in the last 15 minutes when you're cooking it. Less than that, in a slow cooker, the last 15 minutes. If you're doing it on the stove, just add it till it turns pink. So I'm gonna move all this stuff out of the way real quick and pull out my meat cutting board again. Because we gotta dice up our sausage, and I'm gonna grab my sausage. All right, so you want a pre-cooked Italian sausage. We're gonna add this first. And I just bought the Aldi Never Any brand. So there's no hormones, no, you know, nitrates, no antibiotics or any of that nasty stuff in here. And it's already cooked through, so I'm just gonna pop these out onto my cutting board. And I'm just gonna do a quick slice into rounds, probably about a 1/2 inch, maybe a little less than 1/2 inch thick. And I did get a mild sausage, but if you like it spicier, you can use a spicy sausage. Personally, I think there's enough spicy flavors in this recipe that I don't need to add a spicy sausage, but I also, my husband and I don't like a lot of spicy foods, so, you know, do what works best for you. All right, so there's that. There we go. Okay. So just drop those. Oh no, runaway sausage. The dogs will love that. So we're going to drop all of these right into the bag, and then I'm going to rinse my knife and cutting board again, and then we're going to move on to our peppers and onions. Okay, so before we add the peppers and onions, we're going to add the olive oil that was at the top. So it calls for 4 tablespoons of olive oil, which is 1/4 cup. So I'm just going to do a 1/4 cup measure. If you prefer to use measure out 4 teaspoons or tablespoons, that's fine too. All right, so it seems like a lot of olive oil, but it'll help the peppers and onions to get nice and soft and wonderful while they're cooking. This is a really easy stir fry recipe. So even though it does come with recipe a recipe for how to use this with a slow cooker, I highly recommend that you stick with the stir fry. It gives it a much better texture. All right, so pull the seeds out of your peppers, I should say. And put them wherever you're putting your scraps, and then we'll get to slicing. All right, so we're just gonna slice these the same way we did with the first recipe. quick slice, as thick or as thin as you prefer them. And then I am going to slice them down the center again. I just like that size. It's my preference. All right, again, just quick slice. And again, down the center. Drop them in the bag and move on to pepper number 2. And again, make sure you're cutting at a pace that is safe for you. If this is too fast for you, slow down. Feel free to let me know and I can slow down. All right, last half of pepper. There we go. All right. So now we're going to move on to our onion. So I'm going to go grab another onion out of the fridge. Again, you know, slicing these as big or as small as you want. Oh, this one does call for diced. Excuse me. This one we're going to dice. Pull the outer edge off. There we go. Okay, so the easiest way to dice it is just cut it into 4 maybe 6 chunks. One direction and then slightly smaller slices from the other direction. And then just drop them in the bag and switch. There we go. 4 slices again and then nice thin slice going the other direction. And if you like them a little bigger, a little chunkier, that's totally fine. If you like them a little smaller and more uniform, that's fine too. All right. So our onion is done, and then we're going to go on to our squash or zucchini, whichever you prefer. I grabbed a zucchini today. So we're just going to cut the ends off. And then the easiest way to do this is to slice it in half and then slice each half in half so that our zucchini has been quartered. And then we'll just slice this way. I'm only going to do 1/2 at a time. So just go right down the length of your zucchini, as thick or as thin as you prefer these. And we're just going to drop those right in the bag. All right, and again, real quick, just chop down the length of the zucchini. There we go. Whoop. Lost a piece of zucchini. All right, so we're gonna drop these into the bag. Ooh, those onions are getting to me. Okay, so now we're gonna go through, add 4 cloves of garlic, 3 to 4 cloves of garlic. I'm gonna add 4. So we got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, just gonna give them a quick smash so that, oops, got the end stuck on that one. So that they're easier to peel. And then just pop those right off. Quick and simple. All right, and then put those into the garlic press, or if you prefer to mince them, you can. I'm going to do mine 2 at a time here. Mincing them straight into the bag. Again, we're just trying to keep our dishes to a minimum here, so we try to do all of our mixing in the bags. Got a few pieces that got away there. There we go. And then just use the bag to scrape off the side of the bottom of your garlic press, and again, save some of the mess. All right, salt and pepper. So obviously there's already some salt in the sausage, so I'm only going to add a half teaspoon of salt to this recipe. And then it calls for pepper. I am not adding pepper because the Cajun seasoning that we're about to add is more than spicy for me, for my taste. So we're going to add 1 tablespoon of Old Bay seasoning. So I'm going to add 3 teaspoons because my teaspoon measure or tablespoon measure will not fit in the Old Bay jar. 2 and 3. And then we are going to add 1 tablespoon or 3 teaspoons, whichever you prefer, of Cajun seasoning. And my Cajun seasoning is pretty spicy, so I'm actually only going to add about 1.5 teaspoons rather than 3. So about half teaspoon rather than whole, half a tablespoon. So this can get a little on the spicy side. So, all right, and there we have it. Remember, like I said, we are not adding our shrimp. So you just want to put your sausage, veggies, and spices all in the bag and give it a good shake. This doesn't want to seal for me. There we go. All right, so as I said, this is a really good stir fry recipe. I highly recommend doing it that way rather than doing it in the slow cooker. And then you would just add your shrimp at the last second until it's pink, and then everything will be ready to serve. So let's pop our Cajun shrimp and sausage in the freezer, and we're moving on to our Jamaican beef stew next. We are going to start by slicing our sirloin, and I actually had a big chunk of one left from one that I cut earlier today, so I just pulled that out separately. So again, make sure you switch your cutting boards. For this stew, you want 1 to 1.5 pounds of sirloin. You can use chuck roast, you can use that kind of stuff too. It is a stew. It'll cook down and get soft eventually. So I'm going to move my veggie board out of the way, and we're going to open up our next bag. All right, here we go. So we are going to just dice this. This is not easy to dice, I will say that. So again, just like the chicken that we did first, slice it this way, kind of through the center. Much harder to slice. There we go. And then we're going to slice this way. Good kitchen knives are your best friend. Mine could definitely use a good sharpening, but other than that, they are sturdy. Almost done. All right, so then we're just going to cut these slices into smaller pieces and drop them in our bag. And again, just as big or as small as you prefer them to be. Up to you. And then once we finish this, we're going to move on to our can of tomatoes. So if you're getting ahead of me, by all means, go for it. There we go. Almost done. And don't cut all the fat off these because it does add a lot of flavor to your soup, and a lot of it will cook down to where you won't even notice it. All right, there we go. And I believe that is the last of the meat we need to cut tonight. Yes, okay. So we're just gonna put this over here and rinse it real quick. All right, so we are going to start next. Add 1 can of diced tomatoes. So the one thing I usually do before all my preps is take the lids off my cans. So this is ready to go. So I'm going to just throw my diced tomatoes right in there. And then we're going to add 3 carrots and 3 ribs of celery. So I got to go grab those out of my fridge. I rinsed all my other veggies first. I did not get a chance to do that with these, so I'm going to do that real quick. So we just need 1, 2, and 3. And we'll stick that over there. All right, give this a quick rinse. So, moving on with our celery, you're going to cut these into 1/2-inch slices, and I do cut the ends off where it's a little bit nasty. I do not cut the stems off, the greens off at the end, because there's a lot of flavor in those. So I say leave them on if there's still greens on your celery. There we go. So we're going to toss all the celery in with your diced tomatoes and your beef. All right, and then we are going to add our 3 carrots. So we're going to do the, you can peel these quick. It's up to you. If you don't want to peel them, you don't have to. I am just going to peel them real quick into my compost over here. One runty carrot. It's all right. Remember, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask me at any time. There we go. All right, so I'm going to chop the ends off and toss those in the compost. And then I'm going to slice these in half lengthwise. And you do not have to cut yours the way I'm cutting mine. This is just my personal preference. I like my carrots to be more of a half moon than a round in a soup. All right, and then just slice right along the length of your carrot, about somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch thick. There we go. And we're just going to drop those right in with the rest of our ingredients. Do my little short dirt carrot here. And then the last one. All right, so carrot's done. We are going to move on now to our green onions. So I have 4 green onions over here. We're going to chop them the whole length. So you do want to chop those little fuzzy ends off because those are a little funky. I know you can use those as a base in soups and stocks and stuff, but I'm not a huge fan. All right. So again, as big or as small as you prefer. These are a very distinctly Asian flavor, but they are used a lot in Central American and South American cooking as well. All right, so I'm actually going to toss the very tips in my compost and then toss everything else in the bag. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to add 3/4 cup of beef broth. then a 1/4 cup of barbecue sauce. If I can find my 1/4 cup measure. Oh, there it is. All right, so I actually have a homemade barbecue sauce here. But you can use any brand of barbecue sauce. If you're not worried about being paleo, you do not have to use a paleo barbecue sauce. But if you are, Stubbs is usually a good brand. Tessemae is also a really good paleo brand of barbecue sauce. Primal Paleo, I think it's what Primal Paleo, yeah, is another really good one. All right, so we've got our 1/4 cup of barbecue sauce in there. Now we're going to add a 1/4 cup of coconut aminos. Except that I just tossed my measuring spoon. There we go. Woo. 1/4 cup of coconut aminos. Then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of steak sauce. I think. So you can use a steak sauce just like an A1 sauce or anything along those lines. If you have a favorite. There's 1. Just check the ingredients, make sure there's nothing too funky. And 2. All right, then we're going to add an entire tablespoon of garlic powder. So that sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's good. So I cannot fit a tablespoon measure into my garlic powder, so I'm going to use 3 teaspoons, which is the same thing. So we got 1, 2, 3, and then a teaspoon of thyme. And then a 1/4 teaspoon each of allspice and black pepper. So allspice is an unusual ingredient for a beef stew, but definitely add it. It's pretty amazing. Kind of smells like a Christmassy spice, kind of like cloves or nutmeg, very similar to all of those. All right, so a 1/4 teaspoon of allspice and then a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And again, you'll see the arrowroot starch listed at the bottom. You do not want to add that until the very last few minutes that you're cooking, just to help thicken it up a little bit. And you can substitute cornstarch if you don't mind, if you're not worried about the grains. All right, so we're gonna close our bag. Make sure you leave some air in it so you can give it a good shake. And then we're going to press the air out of it and pop it in the freezer and move on to our 5th meal. There we go. So grab those last couple of chicken breasts and my cutting board. So for the last recipe, we're going to be doing the French chicken. So normally this recipe would be really simple and you would just dump a bottle of French onion dressing with some cranberries in here. But French onion dressing tends to have a lot of funky ingredients. So I combined a couple different recipes to come up with this one particular recipe to get rid of all those weird ingredients and keep it nice and clean and healthy. So I'll get all my lids mixed up over here. So I'm going to grab my meat cutting board again and open up our bag. Scooch this over a little bit more. So I'm going to grab the chicken breasts. So I am going to slice these through the center and then once across because these are kind of big. And I'm going to bake this recipe. I will not be cooking it in a slow cooker, so I want it to cook a little bit more evenly. Here, I'll move this so you guys can see. So I cut it into 4 pieces. Here's the other one here. So again, just cutting it straight through the middle and then half. And drop those in there and then get washed up because we're done with all that stuff. All right, so now things get a little bit crazier because there's a lot of ingredients to add to this one, but don't be overwhelmed by it because they are all amazing ingredients. It's going to be a really good combination. So we're going to start with 3 tablespoons of raw honey. So I've got my big jar of honey here. I am spoiled rotten. My husband keeps bees, so all of our honey comes right from my backyard. So we're gonna go for 3 tablespoons. And again, use the side of your bag to scrape out your tablespoon measure, and this will be a much less messy and simpler process. So we got 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Get 1 and 2. All right, we're gonna skip the chopped onion for now. We're gonna come back to that. We're gonna add all of our other ingredients first. So we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. So I have my jar of tomato paste over here. I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon. All right, and then we're going to add 1 tablespoon of dried onion flakes. So you're definitely gonna wanna switch what you're using to measure, because that one had all the gunk on it. So we're gonna go with 1 tablespoon or 3 teaspoons. It's up to you, whichever fits better. So we got 1, 2, and 3. All right, so 3 teaspoons or 1 tablespoon, like I said. All right, and then we're going to add our clove of garlic, and we'll get our onion. Ooh, this one just does not want to peel for me today. There we go. All right, so we got 1 clove of garlic in my garlic press. Press it directly into the bag. Then we are going to add 1½ teaspoons of lemon juice. So grab our teaspoon measure and our lemon juice. We got 1, and then I'm just going to use the same one, but go halves. And a half. Then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of coconut aminos. So go ahead and grab a jar of coconut aminos. And then we're going to skip the salt for a second and add our Dijon mustard. Try to get all the wet stuff done first. There we go. Okay, 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard. All right. Then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. So just regular salt. And then we're going to add ½ a teaspoon each of pepper and celery salt. So it sounds like we're adding a lot of salt to this recipe, but because there's so much chicken in there, it'll be fine. So starting with the black pepper, ½ teaspoon, and then the celery salt. Where's my celery salt? Oh, there it is. Okay. ½ a teaspoon of celery salt, and then ¼ teaspoon each of garlic and onion powder. Switch to my ¼ teaspoon measure. We have our garlic powder and our onion powder. And then we're going to add ¼ teaspoon of dried parsley. So this parsley we grew in our garden last year, and then I dried it. And I had so much parsley, this plant took over half of my kitchen. All right, and then the last thing we need to add here is our chopped onion. So I'm going to go grab an onion out of the freezer and bring my cutting board up. So I have a really small onion here, and this recipe only calls for 2 tablespoons. So I'm only going to chop about 1/3 of this. All right. There we go. And this you do want to you want it to be kind of fine, just because there's not a lot of other chunky stuff other than the chicken in this recipe, so you don't want it to overpower too much. So I keep it real small. And then we'll add our cranberries and we'll be done. All right, so there we go. We're gonna drop our cranberries in there, or excuse me, our onions in there. And then we're gonna do 6 ounces of cranberries. So I'm gonna do just under a cup of cranberries for this. And I did use, I have frozen cranberries. There's no sugar added or anything like that. It's just cranberries. That's why I needed the honey in the beginning of this recipe, because these are gonna be pretty tart. So we're gonna add about 3/4 of a cup. So just not quite a full 1 cup measure. Dropped in with our chicken. All right, so we're gonna seal our bag and give it a really good shake to get all those spices and blended in with the chicken. Make sure the honey gets mixed in. All right, there we go, recipe number 5, and we are done. And it is 8:21, so it was a pretty good time. We made 5 recipes in 51 minutes. So if you guys have any questions about any of these recipes when you're making them or when you're serving them, or even right now, you can unmute and ask me real quick, or you can text me, email me, whatever, Facebook me later with any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. But other than that, we are done. I hope you guys have a great night, and I will see you all soon. Bye.